Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and it's time for our mayoral talk. So it was about the Ordinary Council meeting on the 22nd of June, and I have Matthew Dickerson on the phone. How are you going, Matthew?
Well, I'm excited, Tony, because this is arguably the most important meeting of the entire year. This was the meeting where, among other things, we considered the budget for the next financial year. And that's obviously, we're talking about somewhere in the vicinity of, depends on how you look at it, but somewhere in the vicinity of $250 million in overall expenditure with capital expenditure, et cetera, built in there. So that's a lot of money, and we've got to make sure we get it as right as possible. I'm never sure we'll get it perfect, but as right as possible, setting our sails for the next year.
Yeah. Well, coming out of the draft budget, one of the things that I'm getting from the community is they're wondering if anything's going to come out of it to rectify some of the issues that we've got with Cameron Park.
So at this stage, there was nothing additional for things like extra toilets at Cameron Park. Interesting, Tony, that was one of the topics in during our workshop processes, and one of the ones that we had discussed about, could we add some toilets there? Could we do some things in Cameron Park to return it to its former glory? And that was a discussion, but some of those discussions, and it wasn't just around Cameron Park, but some of those discussions got hit on the head when, after the draft budget went out for public comment, the state government hit us with a couple of extra bills that we hadn't been told about until after that draft budget. One was the emergency services levy that increased the amount we have to pay for emergency services by $616,666, and then another additional $1.9 million due to the local government state award going up. So that was $2.5 million that we hadn't budgeted for, hadn't allowed for, didn't know was coming. So that meant that some of those various projects and some of the submissions we got as well, Tony, we just couldn't really look at because we just didn't have any spare money at all to look at some of those projects, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I hope something happens in the future there, because some of the comments we get is basically, no one goes down to the Sunken Garden anymore after all the roses were ripped out and it's left fairly barren, and the desert towards the end of, down towards the northern end next to the Commonwealth Bank, that was left there after the playground was moved, and also just the general degradation of bedding plants and shrubs to the point where now it's really just a paddock with trees in it. So I'm sure that the Wellington residents are looking forward to something happening that's positive about making it a better tourism attraction in the future.
Well, I wouldn't give up on it altogether, but in the next financial year, we haven't allowed for really any major changes to Cameron Park there.
Okay, and what's happening with rates and charges, Matthew?
So our rates have gone up by the rate pegging amount. That was the 3.7% that IPART allowed generally across councils across the state. There were some variations to that, some special rate variations by some councils, for example, but 3.7% was the rate peg amount for Dubbo Regional Council. So the rates have gone up by that. And we've probably talked about it before, Tony, that doesn't mean necessarily that every person's rates for their house will go up by 3.7%, because you also get the valuer general who does the valuation of your particular property, and that gets combined. So what we do as a council is we can put up the entire rates pool by a maximum of 3.7%. But for example, Geary, their property valuations went up more than other areas across the LGA. So some of the rates for people in Geary will go up by more than 3.7%, but then other parts will go up by less than 3.7%. But that overall rate pool will go up by 3.7%. And then in relation to charges, there's a variety of charges there that have been changed. They're not restricted to that rate pegging amount. So there's different services there. I won't go through every individual service we've got and every individual charge. But to give you one that certainly sticks out was one of the changes we made last night at the council meeting was in relation to a childcare centre in Dubbo, where those prices will go up from the 1st of January next year by 8.5%. And this was really to stop some of that bleeding at the moment. It's costing the community approximately $430,000 to have that childcare centre, and every other childcare centre seems to make money. So we figure that surely our childcare centre can make money. One of the ways we've looked at doing that is by increasing the prices, and our prices certainly were at the low end of the spectrum. So parents that have got kids in that particular childcare centre have got to the 1st of January next year to either agree to those rates, if you like, or move their children to somewhere else.
Okay, well, of course that's Dubbo. And looking at the changes in the valuations between Wellington and Dubbo, I know that there's been dramatic upswings in the valuations in Wellington. I'm not sure if that's reflected in the Lands Department's valuations of it yet. But did the valuations go up in Wellington more than what they did in Dubbo? Would you know?
There's a whole range of different categories, Tony. There's probably somewhere in the vicinity of 9 categories off the top of my head, different rating categories across the entire LGA, and there's a variety of changes there. Pretty much everywhere went up, and some went up by more than others, and I haven't got the data in front of me at the moment to say exactly what went up by what amount, but I know Geary was the big winner / loser out of that. In other words, you'd be happy that your value of your particular house went up by lots, but that means your rates will increase by more than across the average LGA.
And also the valuations, I believe, for the rural community have held up reasonably well around the state and in this area in particular.
Again, all the valuations across the entire LGA certainly went up. It shows some strong growth. And then at one's council controls, the Valuer General assigns the values to those various properties and those various rating categories across the entire LGA. So there was good growth. You look at that from an external point of view and you'd say that property values going up across the entire LGA shows a good, strong economy there for the LGA.
Yeah. And I guess we can be glad that the rates haven't gone up by some of the extraordinary amounts some of the other councils have put an application in for and got. I think some of them up 25%, an extraordinary amount, isn't it?
Keep going, Tony. There are some that are going for 47% rate increases in one financial year, some that are going up around 80, 90% over a 2-year time frame. So there are some extraordinary rate increases. One of the things that we did certainly adopt was a process to do some discussions with the community, have some discussions, do some community engagement, and actually talk about whether or not in the future we should look at a special rate variation. Now, I don't think any councils are interested in going up at some of those ridiculous amounts, but it is harder and harder to keep delivering the level of services we've got at the level we've got them now while we've got so much additional pressure on our finances. And we probably have to get to the stage sometime soon, Tony, where we look at cutting back some of those services or doing a special rate variation. But we'll go out and talk to the community. The rates that we've set at the budget last night are set from the 1st of July 2023 through to the 30th of June 2024. Any other changes we might look at will occur after that. But we certainly haven't said that we're definitely going ahead with that, but we will undertake some community engagement and education programs around that and just get a bit of a feel. Lots of people in the community want us to do extra things. I very rarely hear people in the community telling council to cut back on services, reduce what's available for the community. People typically want more, but obviously that costs money.
Well, that's true. Now, there's an audit of signs across the urban areas of the LGA. Apparently, Richard Ivey had brought this forward in a notice of motion on the 14th of June. So what's happening there?
Councillor Ivey actually noticed some signs around the LGA, around the urban areas of the LGA in both Wellington and Dubbo that were obviously out of date, that didn't reflect what was the reality. There were some signs that he found that were even signed in Dubbo, for example, by A.G. Kelly. Now, A.G. Kelly was the General Manager for Dubbo City Council way back about 2004. He was replaced as the General Manager. He retired sometime around that time frame. So you've got signs that are obviously out of date, that are faded, that don't reflect well on the community. And so Councillor Ivey was concerned about that. In the discussion at council last night, certainly other councillors were concerned about the same thing, that it didn't reflect well when tourists came into town, for example. Even people just trying to read the signs to find out any information didn't reflect well. So that'll be an audit across the whole urban area of the LGA. And then from that audit, there'll obviously be some recommendations about signs that need to be replaced, removed, updated, refurbished. A whole range of options will come forward, and then it'll be a matter of having some sort of costing around that and some way of paying for that. But at the first instance, let's look at what the signs are and what condition they're in before we can make any estimations around the cost.
Okay. Well, I hope the council also puts into consideration the ease and the expense in relation to signage for businesses. I did have a complaint during the week about that. One of the businesses was saying it was very difficult when it came to the process as well as the expense of it. So I hope that sort of is something that the council also considers, because we want to make those sorts of things practical.
Yeah, well, that notice of motion won't do anything for that. And depending on the sign, often signs need to have a development application submitted to be able to get approval for that process. So sometimes I agree with you. It does sometimes seem unwieldy to go through a whole DA process just for a sign. And I know in my personal business outside of council, I've had to do that in the past to get DAs approved for signs. And I've sometimes thought, it's just a sign. Surely I can just put up a sign. But there are those processes in place, and a lot of those are dictated by the state government in terms of the laws that we've got to adhere to. And if there's any specific examples, I'd love any of your listeners to send me through some of those details of specific examples to see if there's some ways we can make that process a bit easier.
Yeah, and also I do know the state government is even more particular about signage on, say, highways, like the Mitchell Highway, for example, is treated a little bit differently to other areas.
Yeah, you're spot on there. It's very difficult to get any new signs on a highway now, and even some of the signs that are there, it's hard to make any changes to fix some of those up because they're worried about people being distracted as they drive and therefore cause an accident. So you're right. There are some various rules in place. And
there was another issue brought on notice by Councillor Ivory, and that was to do with resilience actions. Tell us about that, Matthew.
One of the things that I think is very important is the best time to look at your drought preparedness is when you've got lots of water, and the best time to look at your flood preparedness is when you're in drought. And that's exactly what Councillor Ivey was thinking in this particular case. He brought forward a notice of motion around resilience and just wanted to know what strategies had been implemented and what infrastructure projects have been completed by council to provide greater resilience for the region should it move back into drought conditions. And I think when he said should it move back into drought conditions, it was pretty much accepted that it will do that at some stage in the future. And then also in that report, look at other strategies or projects which are being considered or should be considered to further enhance the drought resilience of the entire LGA. And that's sensible to look at that. There are some things that have occurred. There's been some work done on bores. You'd be very familiar with work we've done in Wellington previously on a bore that is there in Wellington with a pipeline through to the water treatment plant to just make sure that when we are at the point at some stage in the future, which will happen again, where we can't take enough water out of the river, and that can be for Dubbo, Wellington and Geary, then how do we actually get enough water into the water treatment plant to be able to deliver potable water to the residents of the Dubbo Regional Council, LGA?
Okay. Now, another very interesting thing that was discussed was to do with the council swimming pools, which were changed back to council management by the last council to the chagrin of many locals here in Wellington. So, of course, that's been a thorn in the side, and hopefully we will see some improvement in that area. So what was the outcome of that proposal?
So there was a request for proposal which gave companies the flexibility to give us various ideas. So it wasn't a tender process as such because we wanted to give people more flexibility. And we did get a few proposals that came in, and we gave companies the option of giving us a proposal for any combination of the three pools that we're responsible for. In other words, they could have put in a submission just for Wellington or just for Geary or just for Dubbo or any two of those or all three of those. As it turned out, we got some proposals for the Dubbo pool alone, but we didn't get any proposals for Wellington or Geary, either separate or combined. So we got some proposals for all three pools or proposals for just the Dubbo pool. Now, where we've gone at this stage, there's a few technicalities we've got to go through. The resolution from council said that the preferred proposal was a proposal given to us by a company called Belgravia Leisure, and they're an organisation that does specialise in running swimming pools. They've got a number of swimming pools they run across the state and across the nation. And so at the moment, it's not a final decision to go that way. We've delegated the CEO to undertake some further negotiations with Belgravia Leisure, and then that will come back to council on the 30th of June. We're having an extraordinary council meeting at midday on the 30th of June to further consider that. At this stage, it's a preferred proposal for Belgravia, but the final decision will be made as to which organisation we go with on the 30th of June.
Okay. Just a quick update then, Matthew, on where we're at with the bridges, the low-level bridge in Wellington and the bridge over Mitchell Creek along the Saxa Road. And you might want to bring into that the reconstruction work that's happening around the Little River Bridge at Bennelong.
So I'll start with the Little River Bridge first because there's some action happening there. We actually had to acquire an additional 394 square metres of land by one of the adjacent landholders there to basically allow us to continue putting some of the telecommunications and stormwater infrastructure within the public road reserve there. So that's a compulsory acquisition process that we've gone through there to basically allow that road widening to occur in relation to that bridge. So that's I suppose a procedural or technical process to do, but it means that that bridge is progressing, so that'll be a great outcome when we finally get to the stage. And I have joked many times, Tony, that the Little River is poorly named because when we get a bit of rain, it very quickly becomes the Big River. So it should be called the Little Big River in my opinion, but that's an aside. The other two you mentioned, and nothing much extra to report, the Duke of Wellington Bridge, our consultants have finished their inspections there, but we haven't seen the report, and that report is in relation to the structural integrity of the bridge there. So we haven't got anything to report there yet. We're waiting on that information to come through. And then in relation to the Mitchell Creek Bridge, well, it's not a bridge at the moment, it's a causeway, but we are constructing a bridge there, and that process is continuing. But as residents would know out there, nothing has changed out there yet, but we are progressing with haste in that particular area, doing that obviously properly, but we've heard from the residents out there that we want to get that bridge finished as soon as possible.
Okay, and of course you mentioned the low-level bridge, but the other part of that equation is to do anything with that, there's another thing that comes into it, and that is fixing up the erosion problem on the river banks. So is there any focus on that at all?
The process we're going through at the moment is to look at the bridge first, look at the structural integrity, and then once we've got some information about that. So, for example, if the report comes back and says that that bridge has been compromised in terms of its structural integrity, then that's a huge job to fix that and fix the erosion that's occurred. And I will never preempt what decision a council will make, but it's quite possible that council may say if that bridge is not structurally sound, it would be too expensive to repair that bridge and the erosion that's occurred there. I don't think that will be the case. I think the bridge will, or the information will come back to say that bridge is structurally sound, and if that's the case, then that will be a decision to be made around the erosion that's occurred there before the bridge on the approach there on the Bell River. So that's something that we've got to look at. We've got to wait for that information to come through before we make any decisions around that erosion problem.
Okay. Look, I can imagine this is becoming an important situation because it only would take a few more floods along there, and you might have to start the process all over again. Some sort of remediation might need to take place as soon as possible just to maintain the status quo there.
Yeah, you're right, and certainly we are focused on trying to get an outcome there, and hopefully we won't have any severe floods in the meantime, but I'm not sure how much additional erosion would be caused there, and I'm not an expert on this, Tony, but obviously where it turns into the Macquarie River is where that erosion has mainly occurred, but a lot of that's already occurred there. But again, I take your point. We are progressing with haste with that as well.
Okay. And to all those patient road users of Monteviers Road, all we can say is, well, you're going to have to be a little bit more patient.
We are slowly getting there, Tony, across the entire LGA. We've had dry weather now. That means some work can be done on various roads, and we're doing that. But it does take time, and I actually had a complaint there earlier today, and it's a Dubbo Road, but on Wheelers Lane we're doing some major reconstruction work, and a person complained to me that there were detours in place and they had to go around a different way. Unfortunately, you sometimes have to do that to do those reconstructions. There are times that you'll have some inconveniences for the travelling public when you are doing those reconstructions, but we need to do that to reconstruct the road.
Okay. Matthew, thanks very much for taking the time out to talk to our community about what's happening in relation to council and what we can expect to happen in the future. It's always great to talk to you and to have that patronage.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Always appreciate that, and hopefully your listeners are well and truly up to date now.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.